And I'm not here to defend Ta-Nehisi Coates. I think there's an interesting intellectual challenge to all of us, not just him, in our time about the deeply disconcerting moral dilemmas, tragic moral dilemmas that are raised by this historical development. But he's persuaded that Israel is an apartheid state.
Glenn, are you sure that, and I haven't read it, and so maybe I'm missing something, but boy, have I read a lot of reviews, including Coleman Hughes's in the Free Press, which was excellent.
I haven't seen
Are you sure that
Coleman's
Coates actually gives a principled justification of what I'm assuming is his opinion that Israel shouldn't have happened? Or does he cherry pick a few episodes from here and there? Does he make a real case that a public intellectual is responsible at his level of making? Does he appear to have done his homework?
I think he's going to be susceptible to that kind of criticism. He didn't go deep enough. He didn't read enough books. He doesn't know enough about Douglas Murray and him in a debate. Douglas Murray is going to throw the book at him. You don't know what you're talking about, but not. I wouldn't criticize his essay from that point of view. In a way, he kind of knows that he doesn't know all the way down, that he doesn't,
but his feelings are more important because he's
it's
black?
Not his feeling. It's not his feeling. This is his position. His position is it's an apartheid state.
But does he address why?
And he's against apartheid. No, his position is that's wrong. If you watch these interviews, you've heard him use this device. He says, I'm against the death penalty. And I'm against it whether you're applying the death penalty to someone who stole a candy bar or you're applying it to someone who slaughtered 10 babies and then ate them. I'm against the death penalty. And therefore, when I see apartheid, and what I see there is apartheid, this is his position based on his experience. I see, and he describes in vivid detail aspects of what he's calling apartheid. I'm against that.
I'm not impressed by this.
And there's nothing the Palestinians could have done or are doing that's going to make me not be against that.
I'm not impressed by this at all. I find this a simplistic analysis of a very complex situation. Calling it apartheid, there's a certain music to it. Everybody jumps when you say it, just like he institutionalized the term white supremacy in the same way. But what would he suggest be done differently given the reason for this apartheid? It's very complex. And I imagine that his idea would be, what a lot of this all comes down to is he thinks Israel shouldn't have been established, but what is his justification for that? Why should there not have been what's called a partition? And there have been partitions all over the world. And I imagine that his reason would be because they're white and the Palestinians are brown. But does he come out and say that, or does he just assume that we think that? Because that's a sloppy
why don't we circle back to this? I think you ought to read the thing that we're talking about, and then we can talk about it. But I'm going to answer you directly. He is against the project of establishing a Jewish state. He does think that an ethnographic definition of statehood in a population that is heterogeneous is deeply problematic. And that's the moral starting point for his critique. But he employs, and I can hear Coleman critiquing this move that he makes, his experience as a descendant of slaves in the context of the United States, as a dominated people who have to deal with the subjugation, the stigma, the dehumanization, the relegation to the backwaters and the margins and the corners of society. And as a writer, as a moral agent in our time who has that history in his blood, quote unquote, to say that I can't countenance silently what I am observing being perpetrated here. To me, you don't have to have an answer to be able to defend that position.
I think you do. And I am.
What should Israel do?
No.
Why is it my responsibility to have an answer to that question in order to be appalled at what Israel is doing?
No, not with his influence. And given how much is written about this, how richly it's been discussed, He's not responsible for coming up with a game plan, but he's supposed to explain why he thinks that there should be no Israel, especially because in the same book, he says that we should embrace a mythology that we come from Egypt.
He doesn't say there should be no Israel. He says there should be no apartheid.
But does he understand the history that's led to this apartheid? And then also, if I may...
as much as any well-read and intelligent person, and he is both of those things, could be expected to understand it.
And then, in the book, he never mentions what happened on October 7th. Theoretically, because, he wrote it after that happened, but, he uses the passive voice, people were killed, etc. But apparently he thinks that anything Hamas does, the implication is that anything Hamas does is justified because, as you're putting it, or he would put it, they are enduring an apartheid, which is not justified because whether or not Israel is trying to protect itself from being bombed out of existence through this apartheid, it's all moot because Israel shouldn't be there in the first place. Does he actually lay out that argument? Or are we just to assume that there should be no Israel and that therefore he doesn't have to mention October 7th when a book drops a year after that happened? Genuine question.
Yeah, I'm not going to answer that question. I'm not here to defend Ta-Nehisi Coates. I think there's an interesting intellectual challenge to all of us, not just him, in our time about the deeply disconcerting moral dilemmas, tragic moral dilemmas that are raised by this historical development. And he's giving one man's, he is not a random person taken off the street. He is an influential figure. I agree.
Mm-hmm.
Account rooted in his identity, but also in his responsibilities as a writer and as a citizen in reaction to that. And I think it's worth kind of pausing for a minute about that because, a lot of Jewish Americans and a lot of Israelis basically agree with him about the moral challenge which this tragic historical evolution confronts us with. So I can only tell you this. I can tell you as a person who doesn't come in predisposed to like Ta-Nehisi Coates, who spent a lot of time reacting. I did read Between the World and Me. It's well crafted, but it rubbed me the wrong way in many respects, and I've said so. We've had our time here criticizing Ta-Nehisi Coates. I do teach his essay, The Case for Reparations, which is his signature long-form magazine journalism piece that kind of really solidified his reputation. And I have a lot of problems with a lot of what he has written and what he has done. But I picked this book up and put it down in the same day. And I thought, picked it up at the beginning and put it down at the end in the same day. It's a short book. And I thought, this is a fucking brilliant writer. The craft, it wasn't saccharine. It was silky, subtle, engrossing, captivating, really. Turns of phrase that I wanted to underline because I didn't want to not remember how enchanting some of the prose of the book is. And I thought, again, to have been a student of writing directed by this guy, or to receive this book having been his student, and to see this love of words enshrined in this way, and married to a kind of, you can argue about the moral motivations of it. And I, in another voice, I would be arguing about it. As I've said, this we that he easily invokes about Africanness is, I think, deeply problematic. But I thought, this is a serious person. So,
Glenn, I
want to say something else. I felt a little bit like chastising myself for being so dismissive of this guy because I didn't like his politics. I didn't like his racial politics in 2015-16. I didn't like his racial politics in 2020. I was on the other side. I'm the conservative, notes of a Black conservative over here. But I thought I wasn't really open-minded and fair in assessing the quality of the mind and the artistry of this guy. And I got to the end of that book, and when I put it down, notwithstanding his full-throated criticism of Zionism, I said, that's a brave dude there. That's a dude who's speaking his mind and speaking the truth that he thinks he's been given to know. And he's taking his career in his hands when he does so. And more power to him. I don't have to agree with him.
Glenn, I am utterly mystified. And with the risk acknowledged in that I have not read the book yet, I am utterly mystified. And I don't mean that rhetorically. I'm sitting here thinking that maybe I need to put my glasses on. I can't believe this is you saying this. And I'm trying to wrap my head around.
Why not, John?
Because yes, he has a way with words, and I'm not minimizing that. Yes, he's a very good writer, and I see that you're admiring that. But my issue with him, frankly, has often been whether or not, I hate to say this, but put it this way. I have never seen in him the frame of mind that tries to work out a problem, that looks at something that's complicated and tries to think out of the box, to figure out a solution or to figure out an explanation to go from A to B. It's always seemed to me that for him, the constant leitmotif, the constant theme is Black good, white supremacy bad, I'm Black. That's everything. And so now he's applied that to Israel. But if you're going to look at something and call it apartheid and write artistically about that, that's one thing. But why the apartheid? When we call it a complex situation, I'm afraid that complex here means that to simply diss Zionism right out, you have a case to make. And especially if you're him, I'll put it that way. He's not somebody who seems to me to make a case. And that's been true for his whole career. There's just a certain kind of feeling. And you and I used to agree about that. And I know that maybe I'm missing something. For example, I'm not terribly literary. I probably read 6 fiction books a year. Usually 3 of them are ones that I've been told I have to read. I like to try to solve a problem. That's what linguistics is, although a lot of people have no reason to know that. You're trying to come up with a solution to something. And that's what economics is. Well, and so maybe I'm just the wrong person. I'm going to read that book. But I'm really surprised that you are so willing to let pass the ratiocination that one would expect, given the richness of this topic. You're saying he's no Kendi. And I've always thought that he brings more to the table than Kendi, certainly. But to do this whole thing, it's apartheid. And to say nothing about the 1,200 people who Hamas killed and the 200 more who were taken into captivity and, who many are dying now, that doesn't get one mention. I don't, that strikes me as almost willfully uncomplex. That you're saying that there's something about this book that transcends all of that. And I'm open. I will read it this week. I'm going to write it down, make sure I do it.
Okay, why don't we circle back to this topic? I'm not going to try to respond to your disappointment in me for not being as...
I'm sorry, Glenn. I'm perplexed.
Critical, Kenny.
Perplexed.
We will revisit the subject and leave it at that for now.